What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are kind of taking a break from the series, but this week we are talking about Transfiguration, and the title of this week's sermon was Thin Spaces, right?
That's correct. We're going through the lectionary, and it was Transfiguration Sunday, headed into Lent next Sunday, Ash Wednesdays this week in the middle. And so that's where we are at.
I'm excited to dive into this. This is one of those stories that I think sometimes can be a little misconstrued or kind of throw people off a little bit. So it'll kind of be good to dive, I think, help us understand it.
It's a mysterious text for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, let's do it.
Okay.
Well, Dave, you have been to the Magic Kingdom and back. Well, maybe not the Magic Kingdom, but that area.
Yeah.
You had a pretty busy weekend this weekend.
We did. My wife is actually on her way home, even as we're speaking and recording this on Monday.
Okay.
But she stayed on down for a couple of days with my daughter and son-in-law. But yeah, I went to Epcot, drove down on Thursday, and we were there on Friday, and then I flew back on Saturday for church. And so it was a quick trip, but a fun trip, and glad I did it. And
you got the hat. You're repping.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, we had some friends pop in from Philly. A couple of Rachel's bridesmaids were down here. One of them was doing some work, so the other was like, "Well, if you're in Atlanta, I'm going to come see my friends." So we got to hang out with them some this weekend, and it was good. It was a good time.
It was a good day in church yesterday.
Good day in church.
Yeah, had another drama.
Yeah,
and they did a great job. So yeah, it was good.
Shout out to the drama team.
Yeah, they're doing fun. Awesome. We got several coming up in the next few weeks, so I'll look forward to that. But yeah, so we have arrived through the season of Epiphany to the last Sunday before Lent, which is Transfiguration Sunday. And I will tell you, as a preacher, it's an unusual text to preach. Well, at least it is for me. And I've gotten better at it, I think. I think in my early days, I just wanted to explain too much or try to explain the Transfiguration.
Yeah.
You can't explain the Transfiguration. You just kind of have to hold it with open hands as sort of this mysterious things. But, if you're listening and you don't know the story, Jesus and three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, kind of the inner circle, go up to this mountaintop, and there Christ was transfigured before them. They talk about his clothes shining like white, and there being a cloud, and in the midst of that, they also see standing with Jesus, Moses and Elijah, and so lots of mystery in that. And then then God's voice is heard audibly saying, "This is my beloved Son."
Yeah.
Listen to him.
Yeah, basically.
I guess they got their attention. And then in some of the Gospels, I don't think the one that we read on Sunday, but at least one of the other Gospels talks about Jesus saying, "Don't tell anybody." Oh no, Jesus does this. Don't tell anybody until
the skit at least definitely says.
Yeah, until after the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so and the disciples didn't know what that was either. So it was a mysterious thing that moved them. That ends up in three of the four Gospels, all the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's there. And so, what do we do with this? How do we interpret this miracle, this incredible event it's in the Bible? It must mean something. And
right.
I think part of it is to, in the Epiphany setting, is to validate that Jesus was the Messiah and all of that. But for those disciples, how must have that been for them?
Yeah, I was, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, I was like, I wonder why it was just those three. Why not more of the disciples up there with them? I know the inner circle, like I kind of get that, like, a few that were close, but I don't know. It's interesting to think about, because it was like, man, that would have been such a powerful thing for so many to see.
Or why not for 5,000 people?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, so that's part of the mystery.
Yeah,
and Peter, James, and John, each who were very significant in the early church. Part of their being mentored in their journey of discipleship involved this incredible transformative experience of the Transfiguration. And so I titled the sermon "Thin Spaces," and it was after the ancient Celtic Christians had this belief about thin spaces. I think their belief was that the distance between heaven and earth was 3 feet. I think I don't know where they got that, but that was just part of their part of their belief system, that heaven's pretty close, and that there are places where the veil gets very, very thin. And so when you start unpacking that, you realize we've all had, I think, those experiences that almost go beyond words.
Yeah.
That somehow we've been somewhere, maybe it was sitting in a sanctuary, maybe it was on a mountaintop or by the sea or at a graveyard someplace or something. And suddenly God just seemed so present and so real. We might even call those mountaintop experiences,
Wow.
You have any of those?
Yeah, actually, as I was listening to you talk yesterday, I was thinking of a couple of them. Just, I went to the Czech Republic one time and I did a youth camp for the group up there. I was a partner church, and I just remember this one distinct worship, and I don't think it was because of anything, but I got up and speak, and there was translation and stuff like that. And I remember talking about masks that night, and it really, I guess, resonated with the kids there, because like a lot of them would come up to me with an interpreter and just talk about how that's been something real, and then the worship right after, it just felt like things started stripping away. Do you know what I mean? Like masks were being lifted off and so on. And again, I want to say, like, I don't take any credit for anything that happened that night,
right.
But like, it was just such a cool moment, because it's one thing, like if you've ever been to the Czech Republic, the language is hard to pick up. Like Jesus is like, Yežíši or something like that. Like, it's very hard to follow. So it was really powerful, kind of like only being able to focus in on really one voice as they were helping me know what the songs they were singing, but also what people were saying as they were kind of giving their own like personal testimonies and stuff like that kind of related to what was talked about or to the song or whatever. So it was interesting, because like the culture there is like very much new. Christianity is fairly new, as it came out of the Cold War and all that stuff, and they kind of got their space, and it felt like you were watching the first like real movement of Christianity happening right there into that country. You know what I mean? And it was just really cool.
Yeah, and one thing I would say when I'm trying to think of thin spaces are those mountaintop experiences in my life. There are experiences, maybe more often where we are very emotional about something. But I guess how I would define it or take it is that it's beyond just having an emotional experience. Yeah. There is something that is truly sacred that's taking place. We maybe in, looking back, let's try to say, well, we were just overly emotional at that time. But yet, as I really think about it and being really honest, is like, no, I don't think it was just being emotional.
Yeah.
There was a move of the Spirit that was going on that was different. I think about, some experiences I've had in worship, and one in particular, when at the very end of my seminary days, there was a worship services for those who were graduating, and we sang the hymn, Here I Am, Lord. And there was something just in that community of people singing that at that time as they were about to go out, that of course I was emotional. Of course I was moved to tears, but it was more than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just wasn't like, I know the difference of when I'm just being emotional and when something is more high. It just undefinable for sure, but something more palpable that's in the room.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's hard to fully explain, but it almost kind of feels like when there's no real production value into what's happening. do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you just feel the authenticity of the people singing around you. Like I went to a Rock Eagle conference one time when they were doing the United Methodist Men groups up there, and one of my favorite moments, I probably did it 2 or 3 years, was always that Sunday morning when you hear all the men at the same time sing like Amazing Grace, Why Chains Are Gone, that stuff. And it was like, there's just something powerful of just like hearing and being a part of like just authentic worship, but also like, you just, like you said, you just kind of feel like God's like right beside you. You know what I mean? That's like, I don't know.
There's a really old movie called Contact that Jodie Foster was in.
Okay.
And I probably have like opened up a can of worms by using this illustration because I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the movie, but there's a part where she gets put on trial for a thing that had happened. And so they were trying to say that it was faked.
Yeah.
And she said, she said, because he was a scientist, she said, as a scientist, wouldn't you say that this was, in the day, all the scientific speculation around it? She said, yeah, as a scientist, that I would say that. But as a human being, I had an experience, and it was beautiful, and it was transformative. And I wish that everyone would have it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of that kind of thing, and we try to, I think lots of times if we've had those experiences, we try to, in some way, revisit that or engineer it to happen again. And often, the Spirit's going to blow where the Spirit's going to blow. Yeah. And so they're probably impossible to recreate. It's just something that comes as a gift, and we just have to hold on to it very loosely and just be thankful for what it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like these things tend to happen. You've been calling them mountaintop experiences, or these thin, like it feels like sometimes we go to spaces and we have these encounter with the holy, and they're awesome and amazing. And I would argue there's reason behind that, much less about the space, but more about how we are approaching worship in those spaces or approaching God in those spaces of like, we don't have anything else to focus on and stuff like that. But there's always an end to the trip, and in the youth ministry, sometimes it felt like we were trying to go from like, okay, where's the next mountaintop high we're going to find, kind of that space. But what do we do like in these middle ground spaces? I think in a staff meeting you were talking one time, and you said something about like the in-between spaces. Right. It really resonated with me.
Yeah, most of our life is lived on in-betweens. And that's, that's part of, we had this temptation to stay on the mountain.
Yeah.
And this is probably a terrible example. Right. But since I just got back from Disney, those are great times.
Yeah. Who wants to leave the happiest place on earth?
But you can't live there.
Right.
That's not the nature of why it even exists.
Yeah.
And I think these gifts that God gives us in these thin spaces or these mountaintop experiences, they're not created to live there and to always be there. We love to stay up there.
Yeah.
But just like the disciples had to come down from that we do as well, and we then have to live our lives. And most of life, there's some really bad times, some really low times. And thankfully there's some really high times, some really good times, some really mountaintop experiences, but most of our lives are kind of in between.
Right.
And so it's doing life in those times, and taking what we've experienced and maybe what we've learned from those experiences, and then translating that or using that for fuel to inspire us into our day-to-day life and bringing transformation to the world.
I do wonder sometimes, like, do the mountaintops, you said fuel, and it's like, do the mountaintops just give us that like extra nudge of like reminder of what we're working for and working towards? And, because we also talk about this idea of bringing heaven to earth, and those are places that we experience. So, sometimes it's like, or where that feels tangible more so than sometimes in these in-betweens. Maybe we go up to go, this is what we're shooting for. You know what I mean? To kind of bring it back. I don't know.
Yeah, I learned a definition of a sacrament one time, and I can define the sacrament beyond the two that we recognize as official sacraments of baptism and communion, but defining them as a sacred moment or a holy time where God reveals to himself to us in a special way to affirm the relationship that we are striving to live out with him. And so I think there is that part of, and lots of times the thin spaces can take place in the sacraments,
Right.
But, I think there is, we've talked, you're doing a Bible study right now on Sabbath. Mm-hmm. There are creating those spaces for us to rest and to hear from God. But I look at these thin spaces as a little bit outside that, you know what I mean? That they're you're usually not planning for them. They just happen.
I think it can happen in those spaces, but they're not like programmable. Like you can't just say, all right, Wednesday at 3:00, we're going to have a thin space moment or whatever. Right. Like it's more, I think it's more even about maybe the attitude in which we're looking and finding things of how we're approaching God and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, because if I'm coming anywhere, I could be going, to the middle of Jerusalem, and because you were talking about kind of traveling over there,
right?
Like I could be there, but if I'm constantly thinking about the 150 other things going on in my world, I'm not going to take in where I'm at.
So there's sort of personal preparation.
I think so. Yeah, I think there is some space that, like, we have to help ourselves get into a mindset and a space. Even like for Sunday worship, like, a lot of us come into worship. I can speak from my personal experience. Is like some Sundays sometimes feel like it's hard. Like by the time you get the kids dressed, get them in the car, get them here, get them where they need to go. Like I get to the service and I'm like, okay. But normally it's like the second or third song that I'm like, okay, I can worship. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
And it's almost like, man, I just wish there was a couple more. That's not a thing about how we're doing worship, but that's just sometimes like when I can prepare and put myself in a space. Like if I had a quiet morning to kind of quietly reflect and prepare, I'd probably come to worship very prepared, ready to go right off the rip. Sometimes it takes a little while. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But, but I do think there is the sense of like it not being expected. I mean, I do think that there is preparation and particularly preparation for worship.
Yeah.
If we're really going to engage in it, if we're really going to engage in Sabbath, there is preparation for that. And there's probably a similar thing that could be said for these mountaintop and thin space experiences. I just don't think you can plan for them. I was thinking about Moses. Here's what happens. Moses in the burning bush.
Right.
Okay, so we had this story in the Bible. Something happened very, very transformational to him.
Yes.
Take off your shoes and your holy ground on the burning bush. And so
I'd pay attention.
And also, it gets written down the best way it can be written down.
Yeah.
A burning bush that's not consumed.
Right.
What's the best way you could describe it? That. But, it probably was limited, and even in that. Then we as human beings get our hands and fingerprints all over it trying to explain what exactly that was that happened. You know what I mean? And I just don't know if the Holy Spirit can be contained that way. And so, when you're kind of blown away because it wasn't expected, I think that it kind of gets at maybe closer to what they experienced the Transfiguration. It says, they were sleeping.
Yeah.
They were tired. They were walking up the mountain and resting and, kind of dozed off.
Right.
And so
I tell you, there was a point in my ministry where, like, especially when I talked about like mission trips and our summer things, like I always liked going to the same places for a while.
Right.
But then I started to thinking about it and realizing, my first year always seems to be the most trusting, spiritual one. And not because like I planned that, but I think it's because I didn't have the expectation of where God could show up or whatever. Like I was kind of going into a lot of them going, you lead, God, you know what I mean? Like, and in those spaces. So
I think it is.
There's a little bit of that, like
that sort of not knowing what to expect, because when we have some expectation of what to expect, we begin to put our hands on it.
We try to program God.
Yeah, it's like this is going to happen here and there.
Yep.
And so, I mean, I think there is a balance there. But my guess is, if you were to ask the kids in youth group who went on those mission trips, I was thinking back to my days when I used to direct youth choir.
Yeah.
And so, the kid would be getting prepared to graduate, and you would ask them, like, what was your favorite choir tour? It would almost invariably be the first one.
Yep.
And it was like, why? I mean, like, we went to California this year. We just went to Florida that year. I know, but it was just, it's just that sense of not knowing what to expect.
Yeah.
That and the surprises that go on.
Well, speaking of people kind of putting their hands on stuff and kind of inputting their own style or viewpoint of how things are going, maybe it's a good time we talk a little bit about the Asbury revival kind of going on, because it feels like the Christian community is almost a little bit divided on it, of whether they're almost trying to gatekeep it. It feels like.
The Holy Spirit's going to do what the Holy Spirit's going to do.
Yes,
and I'm all for revival.
Right,
and don't have any doubt that something has happened there. But like people who haven't been there, that weren't experiencing it, are interpreting, and just like we might try to interpret. What happened to Moses and the burning bush was this or whatever.
Yeah.
Try to explain the transfiguration. You can't explain the unexplainable.
Right.
But I guess what I would say about a true revival is, what is it leading to, or any mountaintop experience, whether it's the Asbury revival or a youth mission trip that you were on, or some other experience that you had.
Yeah.
What did it lead to? What fruit did it bear?
Right.
Was it just because if it's not leading us to change something fundamentally about ourselves,
right,
then was it just something that made us feel emotionally good?
Yeah.
I think true revival, true mountaintop experiences, they always have something that comes later on. They affirm that. And so, that's my prayer for what's happening there. But, I know a lot of people are making pilgrimage stays there and everything. And to me, it was kind of interesting with yesterday being Transfiguration Sunday. It's like, you can't stay up on the mountaintop.
Yeah.
I think revivals are great, but they're not meant to live there forever.
Right.
And so, and I don't think anyone is suggesting that.
Yeah.
But it is, I think that's part of an indicative of our culture right now, is to be very divided and, sort of like politically correct everything.
Yeah.
And so, whatever's happened there, I'm curious and to see what happens next.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I would say too, is like, and just in case you don't know much about it, there's been basically an ongoing, they would say a movement of the Spirit for over a week now. They've basically been 24/7 in worship and prayer and message and people repenting and stuff like that. So whatever's happening out there, it sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting to study, because there have been other revivals in history that you can go back and study. And one that I had done some work on before back in my graduate studies was Azusa Street, I think it was. It was in California.
Yeah.
But you can Google that and look back at that. And what was really very cool about that was at the time, which I think it was in the early 1900s, it was, first of all, it was very multi-ethnic. There was black people and white people and all of that, and then there were women in leaderships, which wasn't heard at that time. There was lots of things that were going on as the Spirit was moving and changing things. And then what kind of killed it was then when like people that were in kind of power control positions came in and put their hands all over it to try to wield it, guide it however they wanted to. Yeah. So it's best, I think, just to kind of take your hands off of it and let the Spirit lead and see what new thing God is going to do out of it.
And that's one of the things that I would say actually kind of encourages me about the movement is that a lot of Asbury leadership, like the president and so have come out and said you can come and experience if you're one of these popular Christian figures, but you're not getting on the stage. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're not letting anybody take credit for anything that's happening. The only person getting credit here is Jesus. You know what I mean? Which I love. But I do agree that we're going to see, or we're going to need to see some fruit on the backside. And I think we're seeing people repenting and stuff, which is beautiful. But for some of these people that have been there for a while, it's like, okay, how can we show everybody else the love of Jesus and help to have them into these thin spaces? How can we help usher people who need Christ outside of this pocket of Asbury? And I mean, there's other places trying to jump into it as well.
Just think of this age of social media. I just, wish whatever is happening there with those kids, I wish that like other people would leave them alone and just let it happen.
Yeah, just let it go.
Just like all the commentary and some very unchristian kind of commentary, criticizing it. I mean, the Spirit is going to move the way the Spirit's going to move.
Yeah, I love how you say that.
Yeah,
it's like, who's going to gatekeep? I'm not what Jesus might be doing, or what the Holy Spirit's doing.
I'm not going to gatekeep the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
and I don't doubt that some great things are going to come out of it, and I also don't doubt that some people are going to try to manipulate it for their wills, and that's okay. But I've got nothing but for revival, for the Holy Spirit. So
absolutely. I bet there's something we could all agree on, is that we could all use a little more Jesus.
Yeah,
if he's going to come in through this a little more, I'm all for it. But I think it's such a good experience, or it's a good tie-in to what we're talking about here. This idea of these top of the mountain,
thin spaces.
Yeah, these thin spaces where God just feels very real and very tangible. And if you've got stories of that, we want to hear them. But also just if you're somebody who hasn't felt that in a while, come talk to us too. I think sometimes people can get discouraged too when it feels like they haven't had a top of the mountain experience in a long time or whatever. And, I don't know that God necessarily fully moves in just these highlight moments. I think a lot of this in between stuff, we need to understand how God's kind of working on the pathway as well.
Yeah. I mean,
not just.
And what happens is, if like you say, okay, this experience that has happened to this person that suddenly becomes like the standard that everybody has to have that same experience that, and demonstrate this sort of emotion or whatever. There's take something like speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Now, I've got friends who speak in tongues. That has never been part of my experience.
Right.
But I'm not. If it's happened to somebody else, I'm not. I'm. That's great. I'm glad that Joe. Led you closer to Christ. But don't say that is something that is required of every believer.
Right.
So I guess that's part of the abuse that I can see coming out of, these high, times of thin spaces, and ultimately, our mission is the kingdom of God, the transformation of this world for Jesus Christ. And so how is this leading to that? How are we making disciples of, how are we changing lives, leading others to Christ, we are all looking for those spaces, and they're great. It's great when it comes.
Yeah.
It's great.
And maybe that's why it was Peter, James, and John up there is they were the people who, like, once they left that mountain, they knew what it was going to take to kind of walk that walk for a while, because these were very instrumental people in the early church.
In one of the texts, as they're coming down, after they've had this great experience, they immediately come into Jesus, like the other disciples are there trying to drive demons out of this kid, and they're not able to do it, and and so it is a stark reality of like this high mountaintop experience and entering back into the world that we have to deal with and have to live in every day of life. And so, there is a reality, you come off a mountaintop experience and suddenly the world hits you like square in the middle of the face, and so, such is life and the journey. And we move from this high mountaintop experience on Sunday of the Transfiguration right into Wednesday with Ash Wednesday, where, me and George Freeman are going to be putting ashes on people's foreheads and saying, "From dust you came, from dust you shall return," and reminding us of our mortality. And so that's all part of the of the Christian journey.
That's right.
Yeah,
it'll be good.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to Ash Wednesday. I love this season of Lent, and although sometimes it feels like we're looking at the same story, it's a reminder to me about like just the journey that we all get to kind of walk on together.
Yeah,
to the cross, but also past the cross, and you know what I mean. Like it's such a cool.
And there's things that have to happen every year, I think, for regeneration to happen. For us to grow and to produce fruit. And some of the images that with one of the videos we're using on Wednesday night, has people burning off grass, in their lawns.
Yeah.
Which is something that happens, for a lot of people every spring. If you're going to have a beautiful lawn, you've got to, sometimes you have to burn all the dross away.
Right.
And so Lent kind of does that for us.
Yeah.
It's doing the work that Lent should do.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're headed.
That'll be great. Well, I'm excited for it. This has been a fun podcast, Dave.
Yeah.
Got a lot talked through, and as always, we love to interact and connect with you guys. So if you have any questions for us, anything that maybe sparked up as we were talking or whatever, shoot it to our deep dive at hickoryflats.org email. You can drop it in the comments. You can drop it wherever you're watching. Love to be interacting with you in those spaces. But other than that, Dave's already kind of previewed the next where we're going next, and then
I just remind you that Wednesday night that we do have a pancake dinner, 5:30 to 6:30 that the youth are putting on. It's a fundraiser for them. It's only $5. There'll be plenty of food if you haven't signed up.
Pancakes.
Just come on.
Yeah, it'll be just come on.
And then the service is at 7:00.
Right.
And so then we start the season of Lent, a new message series on Sunday.
It'll be good. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. God bless.